we project on animals, and so one person might dislike birds, another alligators, another bat, and all of those shadow animals are the ones that can help them see what it is kind of that they might want to deal with within themselves. And we do it collectively too, we do it, we have many myths and legends about, the monster, the beast that lives in the cave or under the bridge or whatever it is. Those are collective shadow animals. It's kind of like our group dream, of what scares us, of what we fear, what we don't want to see about ourselves.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth.
I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode, Dawn Baumann Brunke returns to Rebel Spirit Radio to discuss her new book, Shadow Animals: How Animals We Fear Can Help Us Heal, Transform, and Awaken. In addition to talking about the importance of engaging in shadow work, Dawn and I discuss animals in tarot, monsters of the deep, cats, bats, and rats, as well as the bugs that bug us. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. Your support is truly appreciated. Dawn Baumann Brunke is an author, animal communicator, and dream enthusiast who lives in Alaska. She has led workshops in animal communication and offered animal consultations for over 20 years. She also designed the Animal Wisdom Tarot deck and offers tarot readings. Her many books include Animal Voices, Animal Guides, Shape-Shifting with Our Animal Companions, Animal Teachings, The Key to Spirit Animals, Dreaming with Polar Bears, Awakening the Ancient Power of Snake, and her most recent publication, Shadow Animals: How Animals We Fear Can Help Us Heal, Transform, and Awaken. Dawn, welcome back to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Hey, Nick. Thanks for having me, and nice seeing you again.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see you too. You're my second return guest. So I'm really happy to be able to chat with you again, especially about this new book. I know the last time that we spoke, you said that you were working on it. So I was really happy to see it coming out. And, like all of the other books of yours that I read, I thought it was a really fun read. And it's engaging and enlightening. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I have to, I have to entertain myself a little while I'm writing.
Yeah. Well, it always speaks to me. I know that when we spoke previously, you've got the background in religious studies as well. So I always really appreciate how you're digging into the religious and mythological traditions in your writing. So it's my language. It's my language too. So I thought the first question, and I imagine that there are two parts to the answer to this, but what is a shadow animal?
Okay. Should we start with the shadow?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I figured there were two parts.
Start at the beginning. I use the shadow as it's a psychological term. Carl Jung wrote a lot about the shadow, and the shadow is basically all those parts of ourselves that we prefer not to identify with. So shame, arrogance, greed, weakness. We don't like to see those ego deflating qualities, so we hide them away in the basement of our being, And so basically the shadow holds everything that we judge or we disown or we hide. Yeah. And I think it is just good to point out that we create our shadow very early in life. As little kids, we kind of learn from our parents and our teachers that they want to see the smart, obedient, cheerful self. So all those other aspects of selves, maybe the rebellious self, the naughty self, the lazy self, get pushed down into the psyche. And there's an image I use in the book. It comes from the poet Robert Bly, who wrote a beautiful little book. It's called The Little Book of the Human Shadow. He calls the shadow, or the way we hold it, the long bag we drag behind us, So that's our shadow, and it keeps growing. That bag keeps growing as we go through high school, college, with spouse, depending on which group we're in. because there's both an individual shadow and a collective shadow.
Mm.
So, how does the shadow come out? Let's just talk about that real briefly too, before we talk about shadow animals, is that all of those selves are part of us, and they want to be acknowledged, but they're stuck down in there, and they begin to sneak out. And one of the ways they sneak out is through projection. The things that we kind of don't like and hold down. Well, let me say it this way. Everything that we get triggered by or don't like in the outer world is a reflection of our shadow, right? It's stuff we don't want to see about ourselves. So it's easier to project out there, And Jung did say that the real danger, it's not from meeting our shadow, but it's from refusing to meet our shadow.
Right.
So there's resistance to looking at our shadow because it's what we don't want to see about ourselves. Yeah.
What is the saying? It's that we always see in others the things we don't want to see in ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, if we all would recognize that, it's
it's for sure.
And it's great to do. It's great to see that in the world. I mean, I think it's actually projection is helpful because it helps us see that which we're dealing with, So shadow animals are a unique type of animal teacher that really help us see those aspects that we've projected onto animals. And again, it's important to understand, just like we create our own shadow out there, we create our own shadow animals. So, we project on animals, and so one person might dislike birds, another alligators, another bat, and all of those shadow animals are the ones that can help them see what it is kind of that they might want to deal with within themselves. And we do it collectively too, we do it, we have many myths and legends about, the monster, the beast that lives in the cave or under the bridge or whatever it is. Those are collective shadow animals. It's kind of like our group dream, of what scares us, of what we fear, what we don't want to see about ourselves. Yeah.
Right. And we can encounter the shadow animal, and not just in dreams, but also in our waking life as well.
Definitely, and I mean, all you have to do is you say, oh, well, what's my shadow animal? Well, what animal are you uncomfortable around? What animals don't you like? Which ones give you the willies?
Right.
That's a really good clue as to what your shadow animal is.
Yeah. And mine had always been snake. We talked about this the last time. But I have a much better appreciation of snake now. And I miss not seeing the snake when I go out hiking. And when I see one, I have to take pictures of it.
Oh, that's good. Well, that's a great way to honor snake, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I learned things from snake. It's like, give people space, give them room and consideration, because it's when you get too close, that's when snake becomes uncomfortable and can become threatening.
Definitely.
I still don't know that I want a pet snake or anything, but I see it as being really important. And I think that this working with the shadow is absolutely crucial. And I think that this is in some way how you frame the book, because you start by saying that the book's not really about shadow animals, but it's about humans, right?
It is.
And how we suppress and ignore and avoid our shadow. Those are your words. And that the shadow animals can help us find it. And I want to kind of go back to this theme a couple of times as we talk, because my opinion is this sort of shadow work is probably the most important thing that any of us can do right now.
I agree. And Jung would agree with you too. He just felt like our survival depends on it. And if we're not willing to look at those shadowy aspects of ourselves, we're going to continue to project and be triggered, and thus wars are born,
Right. Right. Yeah. It's difficult work. It's hard work. And I like that you provide some really interesting exercises in the book. And these are exercises that are different than other shadow work that I've seen. So I really appreciated the exercises that you gave in the
Oh,
book.
well, that's good. And, I just want to interject. Yes, I agree with you. Shadow work can be really difficult and it can be hard and it challenges us. But I think it can also, we can also learn to dance lightly with it, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can learn to kind of a little bit have fun with it and have fun with ourselves,
Yeah.
So it's both.
Yeah.
It's both
Yeah.
dark and light.
Well, yeah. Well, there's always treasure there,
Yeah.
there's always a treasure there. And working with it is a way of self-discovery, that we become more
Definitely.
whole, we become happier, and like you said, lighter.
Lighter. Yeah, because you're letting go of all those things that you're so heavily judging, or not only in others but in yourself, huh?
Right.
So you're clearing away, you're tightening, you're lightening up.
Yeah. And it's that, and I think you, if I remember right, you even bring this up in the book. There's that statement about the two wolves that live within us, and which wolf do you feed? And I think sometimes, and I recently discovered this about myself, is that I'm feeding something that I don't want to be feeding. And it's like, oh, I'm getting nourishment off of this specific reaction from people, and I don't want that anymore. And so it was hard work to get there, but I think at the end of the day is going to make my life way more, well, just better. It's just better in so many ways.
Can we just talk about that story once? Because I did find it a really interesting story. I always learned it as a Native American story about a grandfather talking to his grandson saying, there's a dark wolf and a light wolf. And the dark wolf is, kind of the arrogant, greedy one, the one that wants, the one that is sneaky. And the good wolf is the one that's compassionate and good, and they're always waging war with an individual. And the grandson said, which one's going to win? The grandfather says, the one we feed. And so when I was writing and I had always liked that story because I was like, you feed the good, But when I'm working on my chapter about dog, in which wolf figures prominently, I thought there's something not right with this story, because by not feeding the dark wolf, we're starving it. And that sounds like how we make shadow in the beginning. Right. So I researched the story. It was difficult to do because there was a lot of stories about the story. And I did find two instances it was published both by evangelical preachers in the 1970s. And so I think Billy Graham might have been one. I can't remember the other. And they told it as terms of two dogs, and one's black, one's white, and the white one always wins. And, it's kind of this moralistic prompt to do good. And then I found what some people claim is the original story. And the grandfather doesn't tell the grandson to, whichever one you feed. He says, you learn to feed them both right. And I thought, wow, that's exactly it. So we learn to feed our shadow in ways that is nourishing to shadow because it's nourishing to us. And we bring it up in a safe, comfortable way where we integrate. The dark wolf and the light wolf, the good and the bad, and then that's the way I think that we expand ourselves, It's not by pushing one off; it's by listening to what it needs and finding out more about it.
Yeah. And in my experience with what I was just saying is, I think I was only feeding that sort of negative wolf and not aware that that's what I was doing. So it's like the good wolf was sort of the one that was starving, but I totally agree. And I think that's the key with the shadow. Isn't it that Jung says, we need to embrace the shadow. There may be some collective shadows that we can't necessarily embrace. But I think there are still aspects of it that we have to embrace.
Or at least understand, acknowledge, understand, learn. And you're right. You might not embrace that whole shadow that, is arrogant, violent, whatever, but you pull those pieces You listen to it. That's my main thing.
Right.
You know, you listen to it, you acknowledge it, you find out what parts of this can be integrated. You know, I was just talking with a woman in the UK here, and we were talking about how, actually with Snake, how sometimes we need teachings. We need to be a little bit of a bully or a little bit aggressive, you know, for being attacked or things. So some of those shadow animal selves have skills that are really very helpful. And we don't want to let them go crazy. But on the other hand, sometimes they're useful, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we have to shake our tail and warn people, if you keep it at, I'm going to bite.
You know, and it's a respectful thing to shake the tail from the snake,
Right.
isn't it? It's a warning, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a bite, it's a warning.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, and it was interesting because you go through a lot of different shadow animals, and I don't want to go through all of them, but I do want to go through some of them.
Sure.
And I kind of want to repeat this idea that they can appear to us in waking life as messengers. It seems to me that there's a synchronous aspect to them sometimes. And so it pays off to be very mindful of the animals that we encounter in our daily lives, to see what kind of messages they may have for us.
I agree. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well,
oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, sometimes we're totally unaware that the animal teacher is a shadow animal.
Yeah.
And I could tell my brief little story about a cat.
Please.
When I was 9 years old, I went with it was my first experience of a shadow animal that I can recall. I went with my sister and my mom to visit one of my mom's friends, lived a couple of hours away. So we were going to spend the night and a little adventure, and we had a great time. This woman had cats. She had 3 cats. And I've always been a dog person. Don't dislike cats, but they're just, you know, they're not dogs. So anyway, we spend the night, and in the morning I go downstairs to get a glass of milk, and they're standing or sitting in front of the refrigerator is the eldest cat. It's a beautiful gray cat, brilliant green emerald eyes, looking at me in a very specific way. And I felt it, I felt that cat looking inside of me and seeing something about me I didn't know. It scared me. I turned and I ran up the stairs. The cat runs after me. The cat never touched me. I jumped on my mom's bed. I was safe. We all kind of laughed. Dawn's afraid of cats, right? And again, I think that was one of my first experiences with a shadow animal. I didn't have the wherewithal at age 9 to call it that. But what was interesting is a very short period of time after that, I developed an allergy against cats. I got a really, you know, runny nose, eyes red. I used to get a rash on my body. And so I had to wash my face and hands. And I just learned that it was easier not to deal with cats. And so that's how I lived my life up until college, when I had a dream about a cat. There was a cat, a mysterious cat on the top of a refrigerator looking down at me. And it just looked at me. That's all the dream was. And at this time, I was very interested in dreams and the dream world and how we interact with our dreams. And I had a series of dreams about this cat. It was always the same cat at work, cute little hat, a little Moroccan fez with a feather on it. And so I always knew it was the cat, my cat, and it was always just look at me. And that was the dream. Sometimes it seemed to last a long while. And it got me to thinking about that earlier cat from 9 years old. What did that cat see in me? What did it have to tell with me? Why did my body react in such a way that I developed an allergy towards cats? And so I began to work with this dream cat. And that's really how I evolved or I evolved with my shadow animal cat, where it became more of a guide, more of a mentor, more of a protector. Yeah. And I think it's a great story because it speaks to how we can engage with shadow animals and work with them. And I loved that the dream cat at one point told me, you know, we teach respect by being respectful. And I did feel like that cat was being very respectful for me by letting me open at my own time, in my own place. It wasn't pushing anything at me, you know, it was just allowing that to open. And that's the beauty, I think, of working with animals in general, animal teachers in general. But shadow animals can be they can be non-scary, huh? They can be just.
Yeah. Now, have you ever had a cat as a pet?
When I was younger, much younger, we had a cat. Yeah,
Okay.
Pickles the cat.
Okay. All right. Yeah. See, I'm just the converse. I'm a cat person.
Oh, you're
So
okay.
I always have two cats. It's not that I don't like dogs.
I understand. Yeah, they're just not your thing, right? Yeah.
I would like to have a dog at some point as a pet, I think, but it has to be the right dog.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And since we're talking about cats, I know we discussed this a little bit before I began recording, but in the tarot deck that you created, the spirit animal tarot, you have the high priestess as a cat.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there were a couple of decks that I'm familiar with, the El Goliath Tarot and the Wild Unknown. Those are both animal decks. And their high priestess is also a cat, or Wild Unknown, it's a tiger. What is it that do you think that makes the cat such a good symbol for the high priestess?
Yeah. So I had kind of little subtitles for all of my my cards, and I called it the knower of secrets. And I think that is what cat can represent, is this mysterious kind of unconscious world, or let me say it this way. I think cat helps us as a spirit animal move into that unconscious realm, into that, that lower, or that, I don't want to say lower, but that realm of the psyche, where we're in dream world, where we have, inspiration from symbols and signs. We're much more intuitive, I think, when we go in that. I think that's what cats a lot of times can help us with, is our intuition and kind of fine tuning our perceptions, to see in the dark, to see through the shadow. So there's all that aspect there too.
Yeah. And there seems to be a connection with, and this goes back, I think, all the way to the Neolithic, with the divine feminine. And, in like the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the high priestess is sitting in front of the temple, but there's a veil in front of the temple. And I always kind of connect that with Sophia. So one of my cats, her name is Sophia.
That's a good name. Good cat name.
Yeah.
Way better than Pickles, let me tell you.
Yeah. I've been very proud of my cat names. Right now I've got Sophia and Schrodinger. We have to name a cat Schrodinger. There's so much, and one of the things I've learned from being around cats is the value of patience and observation.
Like the dream cat that came to me, just observing and very patient. And I think, I'm not sure if this is a projection or if this is true about cats, because I don't live with cats, but my experience working with cats, doing animal consults and talks and stuff, is that sometimes if you don't get it, they get a little irritated with you. They're just going to go away and you figure it out, right? There's that little, but overall patience, and then up to a point, because
that's a very good point. Sometimes the cats are like, what are you doing? I am so over this. But I also find them to be very much creatures of habit. They have their set schedules. Sometimes they deviate when they feel like, no, I think I want to be fed now. But often they are very set in their ways. It's quite interesting. And so I will often ask myself, how am I set in my ways?
I was just going to say, it's like humans, we have our own little rituals that we do. Yeah.
Well, I think that I can understand some people, it's like you've got your dog and the cat people. And yet I think that one of the dominant shadow creatures that you discuss is spiders. I know so many people who are terrified of spiders.
Yeah.
It's
funny, isn't it? Because they're so small.
And you even tell a story that I think you were in a hospital or something, and you heard this woman just like screaming bloody murder, and it was a spider.
It was a spider. And I was disgusted with her because she screamed, and a man from a coffee shop came and he stomped on the spider, and I've always been a spider rescuer. I'll take them and, put them on a plant or something outside. But
yeah. My mantra has always been spiders are our friends.
Yeah. They can be.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, they do eat, a lot of other bugs, other household pests. And I'm gonna shout out to my best friend. She told me this over the summer. They had a spider that set up shop in their bathroom, and she got really concerned. She's in Colorado. She got really concerned at winter because there aren't as many bugs. And she thought the spider was going to start. So she actually went to a pet store, and I think she got like some crickets.
Oh, wow.
And she was actually feeding the spider because she didn't want the spider, I guess, Yeah.
I've always had a really interesting relationship. Well, not always, but I would say the last 20 years since I've been writing books. Every time I finish a book, my very first one, I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had just mailed it off to the publisher. I was just feeling like, oh, you're just so happy. I was like, it's up there, right? And a spider came down from the ceiling right in front of me. I mean, like this close, it was amazing. And every single book I've written since then, I've always had a spider encounter. And it's not when I'm thinking about it, like thinking, what's spider? And what's interesting about that is that when I was doing research, because like you say, I like the myths and the legends and what did our ancestors think about spiders? And a very old kind of legend about spiders. Spider is the keeper of words. And there are some myths about spider creating the primordial alphabet on its web and sharing, teaching humans how to record their thoughts and share their thoughts. And
Charlotte's Web. You have the messages there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know that there's these ideas of spiders being connected with creation, and one of the things that kind of came to my mind is the spinning the web of fate. I think the I forget what the Moira is, that what they are in the Greek, and you also connect them with the spinning illusion as well.
Yeah. So there's so many different interesting stories about spider, but I think spider is, oftentimes referred to as the master weaver, the one who creates these designs, these cosmic designs. But I remember there's a couple myths, and I think they're in the book, about spider weaving a web over a cave. It was was it Robert the Bruce? Somebody was hiding. And the spider created this web so it wasn't seen. So there's something also about a spider helping us to see what's not seen or to not be seen. So if spider's your shadow animal in that regard, that would be a really interesting one to work with.
And I had a note in the book. I'm glad you just brought that up because it reminded me of a scene in another book. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abrams.
Oh, I know that. I actually have it on my stack of books to read.
Because there's a scene. I actually will sometimes have students read this section from the book where he's in South Asia somewhere. I want to say he was in Thailand, but I may be incorrect on that. But he's out on this bicycle ride, and he ends up kind of climbing up on this cliff, and he goes into this cave. And he gets into the cave because there's a sudden rainstorm. And if I remember correctly, he ends up spending the night in the cave. And when he wakes up in the morning, he sees, as the sun's kind of coming up, that a spider has created this sort of beautiful web at the entrance to the cave. And he kind of uses this to sort of reflect on, I guess, this idea of subjectivity, that, he's having this experience and kind of waking up, but the spider is also having its experience. And it's this, each one has their own subjectivity, but then there's this shared experience. It's quite a beautiful thing. And when you were writing in the book about that, I wanted to ask you if you'd read that. I think you would really enjoy it.
I will. I'll put it toward the top.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I wanted to share this with you too, that I had an experience with spider. I like spiders, but there was one time many years ago in Denver where I was going through a very difficult phase in my life, and there was like unrequited love and things like that. It was a dark, dark period. And this person that I was kind of obsessed with, I just knew that they were going to be someplace.
Mm.
I just knew it. I felt it in
Mhm.
my bones. I'm like, and I'm going to go.
Mhm.
And as I was getting ready, there was this really large black widow spider just crawled up the bathroom wall. And this is when I was an undergraduate, and I knew connections with spider and the divine feminine, but also kind of in that shadow aspect. And I even knew right then and there when I saw that spider that no good would come of that evening. And no good came of that evening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the only time I think I ever saw a black widow in Denver.
Wow.
And I never saw one after that.
Yeah. Interesting, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just, our shadow animals as synchronicity.
Yeah. And offering us messages and
Yeah.
signs, and if we
Yeah.
choose to listen or not, that's up to us. That's on
Right.
us, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you also said that arachnophobia is a learned phobia. So we learn to be afraid of spiders?
Well, I'm speaking generally. I think most phobias are learned phobias.
Okay.
So you either have an experience very early in life where a spider bites you, or you're frightened by a spider. Maybe your mother, father doesn't like spiders. In my family, it's snakes. My dad, he actually didn't come to my house for 2 years because we had snakes. We lived with
Right.
two snakes. And his sister, and I think his mother's passed, so I don't know, but whenever I would ask either one of these, just tell me a little bit, why don't you like snakes? Oh, can't talk about it. Nope. They just couldn't, they can't go there, it's that strong. So anyway, where does that come from? Does it come from past lives? Maybe even it comes from our childhood. Spiders don't usually, with exception of Charlotte's Web, don't get a great rap in our culture, nor do snakes. So, there's that ew factor. Ew, all those legs, that hairy body,
Yeah.
If you're going to stay at that superficial level, then that's where you're going to be with spider.
Right.
So again, it's a choice. Are we going to allow ourselves to deepen a little bit and look at what makes us feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Or not?
Well, it's interesting, we're recording this on Halloween.
Yeah.
And my neighborhood, I walk in the evenings, and they've gone a little crazy this year with the Halloween decorations, but you see a lot of spiders.
A lot of spiders, yeah.
Yeah,
Bats,
spiders. A lot of
probably
spiders
black
and
cats.
black cats. Yep.
Yeah.
My cat Schrodinger's a black cat.
Yeah.
But then there's also this idea, you have to protect the black cat on Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people,
right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it is true as a generalization that a lot of shadow animals are they're creatures of the night, huh?
Yeah.
Bats, for example. Spiders not so much, but spiders, there's something spiders are kind of out in the corners, and they're there's always something kind of liminal about that animal. Yeah. That in general that speaks to our shadows.
Yeah. I won't kill a spider. I've moved them outside, or at least tried to move them outside if I need to, but yeah, I see them as being beneficial. They're important to the ecology.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that at some point, that they keep things kind of going as they should be.
Yeah. Well, all animals do that, right?
Yeah. Well,
except for humans, question mark.
Yeah. Because I'm like, well, we're animals too. Now you mentioned bat. That's actually one that I like bats. I got when I was a real little kid, I had a bat swoop down that scared me a little bit, but I'm not afraid of bats. What do we learn from bats? How are bats
Well, in terms of ecology, bats do a lot, you know. Do you
Yeah.
like tequila? Then you got to thank a bat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's two types of bat. There's the macro bats, which are kind of the flying foxes, they call them in Australia, or the fruit eating bats. And those are the ones that are responsible for pollinating a lot of flowers, a lot of food. And then the microbats. And I think when people are afraid of bats, it's usually the microbats, because those are the ones kind of with the big ears, the little eyes, you know, they have elaborate nose leaves, they're called, not little nostrils. And, you know, a vampire bat is a microbat. And they use echolocation to discern where they are. So there is something shadowy about that, and something that we might be uncomfortable with. But we go back again, if you're working with bat as a shadow animal, as you talked about, what is it about bat that really bothers me? You know, is it that they sleep upside down and their little, the way they put their things on it, maybe that's telling you it would be helpful to see things from another perspective, or to, so you start playing with it as what specifically about bat that bothers you. And then kind of, ask yourself those interesting questions.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of tarot, I think that bat would be a really good hanged man.
Well, that's who I have for my hangman. I call bat the master of suspension. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's that Odin-like, aspect of the hangman and bat, I think. And I think bat, that card and bat speak to going within. Okay, and the wisdom of taking, sometimes we do need to cloak ourselves, and really take a deep rest and go within and allow things to, there's an aspect of a hangman, which is endings, but we need these endings in order to kind of open up to new beginnings. Yeah. So, and then there's that about bat too. Bat's so much, in myth and legend about transformation and about movements from one state of being to another, like snake. Snake is also.
How do bats transform? I mean, I know that there's this idea of like vampires transforming into bats. And I loved how you said that that's actually a fairly relatively new part of vampire legend, that they always transformed into other animals, but
other animals. Bats. Yeah. It was Bram Stoker's Dracula that kind of brought that whole bat thing in. But I think just traditionally bats have often been about rebirth, and you think about it as simple as, they're in they go into caves, they go at the end of night and kind of come out in the evening. So it's this sense of inverted rebirth into the great mystery. Okay. Right. We don't have to call it the dark or the scary. We could call it the great mystery, or, what that aspect of our shadow self that can awaken with bat. Yeah. So in that sense, transformation. Yeah. But I think the Mayans really associated bats with South America in general, with rebirth, with regeneration, with things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you wrote in the book, because I wanted to ask you as I was reading that chapter, but then you answered the question, but you've been to Carlsbad in southern New Mexico, where at sunset you get just thousands upon thousands of bats coming out.
Yeah.
And that seems to me that it's, having experienced that myself, there's something almost numinous about that, with all of those bats coming out.
Yeah.
A
lot of places there's a number of caves like that, and I think there's a bridge in Texas somewhere where all the bats come out at night, and it's a big to-do.
Yeah. Well, I like them because they're way better than pesticides.
Yeah. One little brown bat, we have little brown bats in Alaska, can eat 1,200 mosquitoes an hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of mosquitoes.
Yeah. And so you think if you have, how many bats, maybe you have hundreds, thousands of bats in those larger caves or under the bridge, and they go out and they eat tons of insects, literal tons of insects. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I don't know if this was just my imagination. It probably was just my imagination. But I had COVID a couple of weeks ago, and I found it really interesting that I didn't really have much of an appetite. I felt nauseous, but what I recognized is that what I was craving was fruit. And I had this moment where I'm like, fruit bat.
That's funny.
So I don't know if there was a connection there.
I don't know.
Maybe.
But it just made me remember that I did write most of this book during the pandemic.
Right.
And it just felt to me like such a great time to go within and really work on what is shadow, and, you might, what's the world shadow animal? It's a little virus, right?
Yeah. And we can talk about that time period. I think that's really important. But I want to go through a couple others first. Well, let me ask you this. The past week, maybe 2 weeks, there is a photo that's gone sort of viral of a close-up. I was curious if you've seen it. It's an ant's face under a microscope.
I haven't seen that one, but I have seen, when I did my insect chapter, I looked at a lot of images like that of insects up close to look at their faces. And I'm curious your experience, but mine is always like, wow, what intelligence is there?
Yeah. Well, and I always find them fascinating, but this ant photograph it really has gone viral because it's so monstrous looking. And the way that, and this is one of the reasons why people are sharing it, and this has gone, gotten people's attention, but it's not quite right, because it looks like it's got these like red demonic eyes, but that's really where the antennas are going in. It's not the eyes at all. And it's got there are these little filaments that are like little hairs, but they look like teeth. It really does look like the stuff of nightmares when you see this. And so I was curious if you'd seen it, because as soon as I saw them, and the response that people are having to this, it's like, there's some kind of shadow, something going on here.
But, I think it speaks to the larger thing about bugs in general. And I mean, why do we have, ever since the 40s or so, aliens? They always have the big bug heads with the big bug eyes and the antennas. And, we have a lot of associations, I think, of what is alien to us, connected to bugs.
Right. Yeah, that was the only chapter where there was something that gave me the willies. And it was, you had the photo of a foot infested with digger fleas. Yeah. I'm like, nope.
I sat with that photo a while, like, should I share this or not? And I thought, it's a book about the shadow. I think I should.
No, that was the most disturbing thing for me. But it's interesting that there's this connection with this otherness with the insects. But the other place that I see that is with things that have tentacles. I because I wanted to ask you, I don't know how you feel about scary movies and whatnot, but there was a anthology series that was just released on Netflix by
Guillermo del Toro.
Guillermo del Toro, the Cabinet of Curiosities. And have you seen any of them?
We've watched the first two.
Okay. So the second one was rats. And that's one of the shadow animals. So I'm glad you saw it, because I wanted to ask you about that. But the first one, and this is also in one of the other, I think in the 4th episode, there are things with tentacles, and I'm like, this is like the shadow. And, I love like octopuses or octopi. I don't know what the
either one would be. That's correct.
But there is something so alien about them, so absolutely different.
Well, and you think about it just symbolically, they're in the deep ocean. So what is that? The deep subconscious, the unconscious, I love my chapter on the Kraken and, all of those monsters of the deep that sailors and, used to project on as these things that would come up and grab a ship and pull it down. Right. So I think and that's a really interesting imagery, isn't there? Symbol of what we fear of our subconscious, and there's something about tentacles, especially if there's 8 of them. That's
What did you think about the that second episode with the rats?
I'm not a shock type person movie.
Right.
I mean, I actually do like scary movies in general, and ever since I was a little kid. I don't like slasher things or torture. That's not my deal. But I do like scary movies that basically introduce you to a fear and help you see that and move through that. Mm-hmm. So I've watched so many, and I think that's why I'm good to write about the shadow, right? Right. Because it is about, what scares you, looking at what scares you. I think movies like that serve a purpose. Stephen King serves a purpose in helping us to look at what scares us and move through that. Yeah.
Well, I saw connections with things that you were writing in the sense of rats, that you wrote that in some cultures they were associated with prosperity and wealth.
Yeah, especially in ancient cultures. Yeah.
And that's kind of what was going on in this, is you've got someone who is robbing graves, but that all the rats are kind of beating him to it.
They're keeping it. Yeah.
And it's, there's that idea of the pack rat that you mentioned, and this idea of hoarding. Right. But there's also the rat, and your exercise is called the rat's treasure.
Yeah.
And I thought, and this character, he ends up, where the rats have kind of gotten their treasure.
They got their treasure in that story. They sure did. Yeah. Yeah. And there's also something about rat, of repurposing. Rat knows how to make use of what's there and accommodate it. It becomes a nest, or it becomes food, or it becomes this or that. And so, so there's a lot to learn about rat in that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I liked how you pointed out that they're way cleaner than what we give them credit for.
Yeah. People who live with rats, I talked to a few of them who have rats as pets, companions, and they're like, oh, rats are so smart and they're so clean. And they're, I met a few and they did seem very clean. So very tidy.
Yeah. I knew someone when I was a kid that had a rat as a pet, but I don't know what ever happened to the rat. I know we're going to start running out of time here in a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, one of the other shadow animals is goats.
I knew you were going to ask about goat.
Yeah. Why is goat such a shadow figure for us?
Well, I think it's, goats themselves offer humans so much and always have, right? So it's not the goat. It's not that aspect of goat, but we do have two things in our human history about goats. The one is the scapegoat. And that's, in very ancient times kind of, and I'm really simplifying this, but a group of people or a town would put all of their sins. They give it to kind of the priest, and he symbolically load it onto the goat, and then sometimes put, red ribbons on it, or red cloth around its horns, or a silver necklace on, and they'd be, taken off into the wilderness. So, wow, isn't that an interesting way to deal with your shadow? We'll put it on goat, and then send it away. So that's kind of the origin of that word scapegoat. There's actually more to it with different religious figures, but that's one aspect, I think, of why goat, of what goat serves in a larger sense. There's nothing fearful about that, but there is something fearful about the connection of goat with the devil.
Yeah.
And so I have a whole section there of talking about Pan, kind of the original goat god, which was part human, part goat, right? And, Pan was this wild guy that loved to dance and drink and fornicate and just have a great time right out in the forest. And the rural people loved him because Pan was a lot of fun, right? And there were so many different versions of Pan that they used to call him the Pans, or at least more modern historians look back and they call it the Pans. And connections with the, I can't think of the name now, right? In the satyrs and there's another one, so we have a lot of different versions of that, but the church didn't like this one little bit. If you want morality and you want order, the last guy you want around is Pan, right? So in a series of artistic and mythological story, legend shape-shifting things, the devil started to have goat horns, and have cloven feet or hooves. and different aspects of Pan, of the great pagan, natural, wild God put onto the devil. Mm-hmm. There's something like a scapegoat about that, isn't there, too?
There is.
Do you remember that saying from the 60s? The devil made me do it. There was a guy who did that online.
Right,
I
right,
can't remember
right.
who it was, but and so we say, the devil made me do that. It's a great way to scapegoat your responsibility for whatever you're doing yourself, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
And the goat appears in the devil card in tarot, and this is the one I think that's the most common. So you've got the goat in yours, although yours doesn't look like a fearful goat at all. It looks like a very friendly, smiling goat.
Well, I call it the shadow god of liberation. Okay. And one side of its neck, it has a chain, which is a nod to how our shadow can keep us chained to ourselves or our dark desires, huh? And the other side is flowers. And I was kind of thinking of the Hindu version of gods who, they die and you open up their coffin, there's just flowers there. Okay, so the blossoming. So it's our choice. Are we going to follow our shadow, or are we going to be a slave to it? Or are we going to, open to it? Right.
Right.
So, yeah.
I never really see the devil card as negative as some people read it. In the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, of course, you've got that really sort of satanic figure and the Adam and Eve, but there's an animal aspect to them as well, because I think they both have tails.
They have tails that end in, I think one ends in little like grape cluster, kind of a nod to the original Pan or Dionysus or Bacchus, and then the other in flames. But you even look at that one, I'm pretty sure I talked about this in the book, is their I think their chains are pretty open. Is it that one?
Yeah.
So it's like you could take off those chains if you want. Maybe there's a part of you that likes being chained to the devil again.
Right.
So then you can blame that scapegoat.
Yeah, and I know that in Crowley's Thoth deck that has the goat, but his goat seems to be more about the sexual aspect of the goat. In the El Goliath deck, that's the only card I don't like, because their goat, the mouth is like covered with blood. But the rest of the deck, amazingly beautiful. I don't like that. The Wild Unknown, and there's another animal deck by a Denver artist called the Brady Tarot, and her devil's also a goat. So it's like, I at this point I'm wondering if there's any kind of tarot deck that doesn't have goat for the devil.
It was the first I thought of when I was doing my deck. Like, it just had to be goat because it's so represented in so many different decks and old decks.
Well, it just seems so, I mean, it is archetypal, I think.
It is,
right there. Have you ever seen speaking of horror movies and whatnot, have you ever seen the movie The Witch?
Well, I'm not sure, because I mean, that sounds like a lot of different movies I might have seen.
Well, it's set in the American colonies. It's a Puritan family that gets banished from the community, in large part because the father is being critical of the community, that they're not really.
I do remember this.
And so like there's a baby that goes missing, and the family ends up kind of, you're not quite sure if they're spiraling into madness or if there is some kind of darker forces, but one of the key characters is a goat that they refer to as Black Phillip.
Wow.
Yeah,
I might have to rewatch that. Yeah,
and it's not a gory one. I'm with you. I do not like gore anymore. When I was a young teenager, I was all about the gore, but not anymore. I find that interesting. As we get older, we just lose our taste for gore. Or most of us do, I think.
But maybe we develop. I mean, maybe we evolve, and we're wanting something with a little bit more meaning, huh?
That could be. I wanted to ask, this will be the last animal, and then we'll kind of start wrapping up here. But you talk about birds, and of course there's the Hitchcock movie, The Birds. And now also my mind is a cultural compost heap. I was thinking of, Schitt's Creek and the Cropocalypse. But how are birds? Because there's that Hitchcock film, but other than that, how exactly are birds shadow animals?
Well, I mean, we can look at certain birds. Raven definitely
right.
has a shadowy aspect to it. Maybe vulture perhaps has a shadowy aspect. There are some birds that that do have shadowy aspects in the larger collective. But there's a lot of people who have phobias against birds. Sometimes it's very specific. Pigeons is a popular one, and they're just freaked out by it. They can't go to New York City because they can't deal with it, right? So, yeah, what does that speak to in us? And again, you have to ask yourself, what aspect of birds is it that's so bothersome to you? Is it the flapping? In the birds, and Hitchcock saying it was kind of about an invasion, huh?
Right.
And it starts out with lovebirds, but it becomes something very different. I think birds generally as messengers. So we have more of in a spiritual aspect, kind of the messengers from the divine, right? They're coming from the heavens and connecting the earth with the heaven. But in general, I think there are some birds that do have that do hold more shadow qualities for certain people. Yeah. Again, Raven is more of a trickster, right, but there are people who are frightened of blackbirds in general. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. And I was thinking of places that were associated with ravens. So I could think of two in particular. One was the Tower of London. Yeah. Where they have, I forget, there's a specific number of ravens there.
Yeah, there is a specific, I want to say it's in the teens, but I don't recall.
Yeah. And they have someone who is like
the Raven Keeper.
Yeah. Which would be an awesome job.
It would, that would be a good job, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And over the summer, I was at Chaco Canyon, and there are ravens there. In fact, I got a hat that has a raven on it.
Well, we have ravens here, a lot of ravens in Alaska.
Yeah.
So and I love watching ravens. In fact, you go to the grocery store, a lot of times there's ravens, hopping around, just picking up crumbs and things. And and they're beautiful. They love the thermals. There's a very playful aspect, I find, of raven, where they just love to go in the really cold days and they'll ride the thermals and just, choo.
Yeah, no, I like them. I like crows too. And I'm never quite sure how to distinguish between raven and crow. But I see them as messengers too. The place I hike, again, I'm not sure. They're really large, so I'm guessing that they're probably ravens.
Yeah.
But I know that they would warn me because sometimes there's like rattlesnake around.
Yeah.
And they would always let me know, be cautious. There's snake here.
I've heard a lot of stories about raven as specifically warning people and, giving a good caw.
Yeah.
Don't go there. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, I heard, I probably should not keep saying this, but when I was at Chaco Canyon, at night, I camped there and I heard voices. I heard a woman's voice call my name. And then later I heard a man's voice and the man was just like, "Hey, Nick." And I was wide awake. And one of the things I thought was, is this Raven? Is Raven talking to me?
Did you talk back? What do you
I asked, the first time it was a woman's voice. Chaco Canyon is, they don't have any light pollution. So it's a place where you can go and see the stars, right? Nice. Yeah. And there had been a storm kind of coming in, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to see the stars, and that's why I wanted to go. And so I went inside the tent, and I was waiting. I was kind of waiting to see if the storm would pass by, and eventually it did, and there was a flap in the tent, and I could see some stars. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go out and see, maybe it's all mostly cloudy or something. But I sat up and I grabbed my shoes. And that's when I first heard it was a woman's voice. And it was just, Nick. And I paused, and I'm like, yes, hello. I hear you, but nothing else. And so I went out and I could see the stars. And I was out there for about an hour or so. And I thought, okay, I should probably try to get some sleep. And so I went in, fell asleep, and I woke up probably a couple hours before sunrise and had to use the restroom. And it was really dark. And I was just like, oh, okay, do I want to get up or can I wait? I decided, no, I need to go. So I'm kind of searching for my flashlight. And that's when I hear the man's voice. And it was like, hey, Nick. I have no idea what it was. But one of the thoughts was, well, maybe it's Raven. Maybe Raven's talking to me. But I don't think they were very active at night.
Well, that's a good Halloween story.
Yeah, it is. It is. Or maybe I'm just crazy. I don't know. But with birds, I think that there's an interesting aspect that traditionally birds have also been connected with soul, I think.
Yeah, with soul and with the connection of there was a woman I just talked to who was telling me about when her father died, a bird came to her. We often have, owls. There's often this connection of spirits who have passed on, and then we also have it from stork, bringing in new spirits. So we have it kind of both ways with the birds. Yeah. But again, that speaks to that larger symbology of, kind of spanning heaven and earth. And that's their domain, is the sky, the air, the spirit.
Yeah. And I think that there's also an ecological reading with the birds, because I was thinking of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, where she's imagining a land that's so devastated that their birds don't return in the spring. It's a silent spring. And so that's a kind of negative messenger, perhaps.
Well, or a warning messenger.
It's
warning, like, are you going to do something? You can shift this, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And and think about the canary in the coal mine,
Yeah, that's another really good example too. That fits for what Carson was saying. I have a special relationship. We have these I guess they're called they're naturalized. Someone in Pasadena back in the 40s and 50s had their own personal little zoo, and it caught fire, and they had all these parrots, and the parrots escaped, and so now they're naturalized. And they travel in these flocks. And it's interesting because there's a tree in front of the house that I rent that I don't know what it is, but there's something in there that they eat. And it's twice a year. So you can actually observe them, and you can observe their patterns,
their cycles.
And they normally show up around winter solstice. That's when they'll be in front of the house. And I love them. But I know others, they're like, no, they're just like way bratty, because the sound that they have, and for
it's sharp, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like Jurassic is how I always describe it, because they are like little dinosaurs. But I call them Grandpa Parrot. I love the parrots.
Are they the bright ones? They're the colorful ones?
Yeah, well, they're green.
Green,
mostly green.
Cool.
I was looking all over I finally found one. I found a feather. I wanted one of the parrot feathers. I know that we're at the end here, so let me ask you kind of about the end, to go back to the humans. Because as I was reading this, I'm like, is she going to say anything about humans as being the shadow animal? Because I think that humans are like the most dangerous of the animals. And as we already noted, you begin the book with that it's not about shadow animals, but it's rather about humans. We both are in agreement that this sort of shadow work is the most important work. Do you see, I don't remember if I asked you this the last time, but I want to ask you this time, because it seems to me that we are in such a precarious situation, and I see shadow everywhere. that's not being worked on.
Yeah.
But do you have hope? Do you have hope that we'll be able to address all of this in a way that we can actually save ourselves?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm always the optimist, and I do know of a lot of people who are working on their shadow. Yeah. Collectively, I don't know if that's so, but I think we're at this tipping point here where if shadow isn't dealt with, you know, those individuals or those groups are just gonna sink. You know, so we're looking at possibly a new earth, a new reality, a new, you know, thing where I think I agree with Young. I think it's the most important thing, and when with you to deal with the shadow and to work with it, and you feel so much better. You know, when I talk with people who've dealt with their or are dealing with their shadow, or, you know, welcoming it, like, oh, I don't like that person. Why is that? You know, and then they start to work with it and process it. It becomes quicker. It becomes easier. We become lighter. We become more light filled. You know, I think we really become more open to spiritual wisdom, if you will. And so, I think it's going to change. And I think if you're going to, you know, kick and fight against it, you're going to have a rocky road. Really rocky road.
Well, and we do have a rocky road. And I think that I saw this in 2020 as you were writing the book, you know, that especially in the United States, we became so divided. And there were reasons behind that. But what I always tried to do is, especially with our sort of cultural or national shadow figure that we had, you know, in terms of Trump, I never would say I hated Trump. Instead, I would always try to turn it back onto me and say, okay, I don't like his arrogance. In what ways am I arrogant? And I think we need to do that with each other and the figures. And I think that's probably the only way we can get rid of this partisanship that's kind of eating us alive.
Because it's easier to other, you know, it's easier to project. The problems are the Democrats, the problems are Republicans, you know, and Trump was also one of my key shadow animals, you know, and I kept avoiding my own good advice to engage, find out what that's about, you know. And my ending chapter has a dream, a really significant dream for me about Trump, and it was funny in a way, and it was redeeming, and it was it helped me out of that, where it's not that I, you know, all of a sudden want to be his best friend, no thanks, but I'm not triggered by him anymore. You know, I can still think that, he's an arrogant man. He has some issues, you know, but I'm not angry. I'm not hateful. I'm not. And that's really, I think, an important thing to know about shadow. It doesn't mean we have to become best buddies with these people. It just means that we're no longer triggered. And we have compassion, perhaps, for them, for what they're going through. They're another human being having, you know, going through their stuff, just like we are.
And I think that's the great reward with shadow work is compassion.
I agree. Compassion for yourself as well as others.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I highly recommend that people get a copy of it. And I love the exercises in the book too. I think they're really unique and fresh. I think they give people something concrete to work with. I'm really glad you say that, because I felt they were very important too. Like, okay, we have this chapter, we got this information. Now what do? We need to process, you know, we need to integrate. So here's 13 different ways, you know, there's 13 different chapters of ways that you can work with your shadow. I've read other shadow work books, and they have activities too, but I just found something, I don't know, more inviting, I think, with these. I think people will get quite a bit out of them. I really do.
Well, thanks much.
Of course. So next to the last question, what's next?
What's next?
What's next for you?
I'm working on a novel.
Are you?
And
Oh,
I'm so enjoying it. I've always written nonfiction. I
right.
mean, I've written some short stories and things that have been published, but a novel is a different thing. It's a
Yeah.
different animal, and
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. So
Oh,
yeah,
good,
having a
good. I
good
will look
time.
forward to that. I will look
Thank
forward to
you.
that. And is the animalvoices.net the best place to find out, still the best place to find out about your
That
new book?
is, yeah. There's links to, if you want to buy the book, there's links to the different books. There's many chapter excerpts and chapter
Okay.
summaries and sometimes full chapters if you want to read a little bit. I always feel like I want to read a little bit about a book before I
Yeah.
purchase it. Huh?
Right.
So there's plenty of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, Don, thank you again for your time. Thank you for coming back. Again, it was a joy to speak with you, just as it was the last time. I
You
really
too.
appreciated it.
Yeah, very happy to. You're really fun to talk with. So thank you.
All right. Well. And that's a wrap on episode 60 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you are a part of my YouTube audience or watch this on Spotify. I'd like to remind everyone about the first Rebel Spirit Radio live stream scheduled for Sunday, December 4th, 2022. Dr. Sharon Cogan will be returning to talk more about dreams and will interpret dreams for folks who join the live stream. Be sure to follow Rebel Spirit Radio on Facebook and or sign up for the newsletter at rebelspiritradio.com so you can be informed of the live stream with Sharon as well as all future live events. I'll also be launching a Patreon in December. Until then, you can still make a one-time donation via PayPal if you'd like to support my work here on Rebel Spirit Radio. And hey, you can still be the first person to do so. You will get a special call out if you are okay with that, and you will have my undying gratitude. You can find the PayPal link in the show notes or video description. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to give it a positive rating on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. It only takes a second, and your 5-star ratings really do help, especially if you listen on Apple. If you have a moment to spare, please consider posting a short but positive review. And please subscribe. For those viewing on YouTube, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you will be informed whenever I upload new content. Also, if you think a friend or family member or coworker would like this podcast, please share it with them. Right now, that is one of the best ways to help me with the podcast. I really do want to grow my audience. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.